Awesome. Well, welcome, John, to another episode of Advertising Alpha. I'm John from Elevar, which is the leading server-to-server tracking software out there, that's used by a ton of different brands. Coming from like a couple $1 million D2C brands to, I believe, not a couple nine-figure brands as well. I hope that's right. But this is, a great solution for us. We've implemented across a lot of our clients who are really excited to kind of talk through the different features that Elevar provides and the impact it makes on brands, especially with digital advertising. So with that, really the first question, we have these conversations a lot with our clients as well as prospects about what is server-to-server tracking and why is it valuable for digital advertising. So I was wondering if you could kind of explain in really kind of simple terms first what this is, what is server-to-server tracking, and like why is it important for digital advertising and for brands, especially in the e-commerce ecosystem.
For sure, yeah. So before we talk about server-side tracking, let's talk about events, because the final output of server-side tracking is events. And when I say events, I'm talking about like a purchase or an add to cart or a view item. Those are events that happen on a website. So really, it's all about the delivery of those events into channels like Meta. Let's just talk about Meta, but what I say about Meta is going to apply across the board to all advertising, analytics, and email channels. So what we're trying to optimize is the number of events that get delivered from the site, from the merchant site to the destination like Meta. That's the goal. You don't know this, and most people don't know this, but when purchases happen on a standard store that's not using something like a server-side tracking system, many of those purchase events never get delivered. So I was trying to think about, in our daily lives, what do we deal with where like it only works about 70% of the time? And I was struggling to come up with something. Like if your mail only came 70% of the time, that would be a serious problem, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't. It comes like 99% of the time. It always comes, basically. And I guess we kind of expect everything to work that way. As I was thinking about this, I think we just expect that it just works. And if a purchase happens on your store, then obviously it's going to get to Meta or another destination. But in fact, it doesn't work that way. And it only gets there typically like 70 or 80 or 90% of the time. It kind of depends on the demographic of the site. So that's the problem we're trying to fix. And that's what we do. We deliver every single, in this case, purchase event to the destination like Meta. That, in a nutshell, that's what we're doing. There's a bunch of other stuff we do along the way, like we enrich the data and we give you configuration. But really, it's all about delivery. It's all about making sure that every single purchase event and all the other events actually get delivered. Why is it important to actually deliver these events? So I went through and I talked about how important it is to get all the events that happen on a merchant's website into a platform like Meta. But the next question is, well, why? It's really important to feed those machine learning algorithms with the best data you possibly can, because the idea is that they're sending you people that they know are highly likely to buy on your website. And if you're sending them bad data or incomplete data, it makes it hard for them to do their job. And then what that really means is they're probably sending you traffic that isn't really the best traffic for your website. So they do amazing things with, really, that's why people advertise on Meta. I don't believe it's because it's getting in front of the audience on Meta, although that's a big part of it. I think it's all about who they send to you. They're just so good at sending likely buyers. So if you don't give them good data and they can't send you good likely buyers, that's a bit of a waste. You're paying, it's expensive to advertise there and you're not going to get the benefits. So the one way to measure the quality of these events is something called event match quality, and we talk about it all the time, but it's a quantitative metric that you can actually see the improvement in when you turn on something like server-side tracking, or you should be able to. And it has a direct link to ad costs. So as you go up the event match quality ladder, your return on ad spend increases, or you could also look at it as like your ad costs decrease for the same number of placements. So the bottom line is that it's more profitable to send better data and to send all the data.
Yeah, and I think the way I've kind of explained it in simple ways, and maybe you can clarify this better and explain it better, but these machine learning algorithms, they're just trying to learn as much as possible who's a likely customer. What happens with like a normal, let's say, CAPI integration, or not even having a CAPI integration, is the events you're passing back are just a small percentage of the events that are actually happening. And then two, with that is they're pretty inaccurate as well. And so what happens, what can happen is I've had cases where we thought we were doing phenomenal on Meta. Like the data looked great. Like, CACs were super low. We're driving a ton of conversions. It looked awesome. And you pop open Shopify and there's just like no sales or minimum sales. And it's a completely different reality that's going on. And then Meta continues going that direction and it's learning and believing it's doing a phenomenal job. And it's getting worse and worse and worse over time. And then two, with incomplete data or very little data, I've had situations where Meta just is spinning its wheels every day. And it might actually be driving some conversions. You're actually seeing, like a serious lift in terms of revenue in Shopify. However, Meta just doesn't think it's actually driving any conversions. And so these campaigns look really stagnant. They're just not even spending that much. And they're just kind of like every day you're looking in the account, it's like one or two conversions, even though you're seeing much better performance in Shopify. So can you explain potentially what's going on there and then why that's happening and how Elevar improves that situation as well?
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple of things there. So the data there's two elements. One is the number of events that actually get to the system, or the percentage of total events that get to the system. And then another part of it is the data in the event, how much data is in each event. So for example, if you send, let's talk about add to carts. If you send an add to cart event without a click ID. So for anybody who doesn't know what a click ID is, it's the way that Meta tracks the clicks and connects them to ads and then eventually outcomes. You can potentially lose the click IDs and then they're not available to send. So Meta can't connect the dots on that add to cart. It doesn't really understand that user they sent to you has actually just added something to their cart and expressed interest if it doesn't know who that person is, or something gets lost in the process. So it keeps on going back to like fidelity and just the percent and quality of the events being sent. So to optimize it, you need the maximum amount of data, which the native Shopify Meta connection just doesn't have. It doesn't have access to it. And then the other thing that native Meta Shopify connector doesn't have is it does use CAPI, but it's not really true server side. So it's not actually connected to the events happening on the server. The source of the event is really important. And I know we're starting to get into the weeds here, but when we listen for a purchase, we don't listen in the browser. We listen on Shopify's server. And that's part of the reason why we can actually get all of the purchases that happen into the system, because we don't have to rely on a browser where the browser's a gauntlet. There's ad blockers, Safari blocks things. There's errors that happen in the code very often. So nobody's even trying to get in the way, but you're getting in your own way. And we can kind of eliminate all that stuff and guarantee. We take away the question marks. Like, you're talking about, well, we had a campaign, it looked like it was doing well, but actually there was no say. All those kind of question marks you can start to remove with good quality data. So hopefully that kind of gets to answer your question.
Yeah, no, that was awesome. And I guess to follow up with that, and maybe my next question actually, because you kind of touched on this, but I've had conversations with prospects, and even too when we first start working with clients, and they're like, "Oh, we set up the Facebook CAPI integration. We're good. We don't need anything." What's the difference between using something like Elevar versus just the native CAPI integration with Shopify?
Yeah, so kind of back to what we were talking about earlier. Again, it goes back to throughput, the total number of events that you get into the channel. So although it's confusing because the Facebook Shopify connection uses Facebook's CAPI system, which is their kind of like their server side system. But the events are not fed from a server. So it's using the high quality pipelines, but what it's putting into the pipeline is not of high quality. So it's really confusing. It's like, well, we're using Facebook's CAPI system. That is that's synonymous with server side tracking. What's the problem? It's just all about the source of data. And if you want to get into like to brass tacks, if you looked at the number of purchases that happen in Shopify and compared them with the number of purchases that get into Meta when you use that Shopify connection, you'd see they're not equal. There's more purchases in Shopify than there are in Meta. Again, it kind of depends on the demographic of the visitors. It could be 90%, it could be 70%. It's tough to say. It could even be 95%. But when you use something like Elevar that does server-side tracking, it is every single transaction. So it takes away the question marks. And on top of that, the data in those events is better. We can send more data, more matching data. So whether that's a click ID or an email address on an add to cart, maybe somebody submitted their email in a form and we know about it. We've connected the form to Meta and we can actually send the email. And it kind of keeps on going. We collect information as the user goes through the funnel, and we continue to send all that information to Meta. And when I say Meta, I'm talking about all platforms, but to keep it simple, we'll keep talking about Meta. So, this is all can sound like gobbledygook, but it can all be summed up by looking at event match quality and the number of purchases that actually get into the system. That's a pretty easy thing to say. I get it. Like you're getting more data with better quality into the system, and that has a result.
Yep.
Yeah.
One thing that we've seen that was super helpful was new customer events and seeing that pass back. And so we can see that within these Meta campaigns. And for a lot of the work that we're doing is we're trying to acquire net new customers for brands. And we can kind of now see through these conversion events in the Meta platform and be like, okay, so these specific campaigns, this specific creative is actually doing a much better job acquiring new customers. And that's been super powerful for us because we can optimize in real time based off of that, which is great. I think it just goes back to what you're saying in terms of the amount of different events and the data that's passed with those events too, knowing that, this specifically is a new customer acquisition or a new customer, purchase.
So you guys actually use those in practice to optimize against?
So it's not like it's an optimization event within Meta, but we look at, we parse through, we were looking to the campaigns, we'd be like, all right, 100 sales today. Out of that, like 60 were new customers. And then another campaign, it's like 100 sales, 10 were new customers. Okay, for some reason, this creative is doing a better job getting new customers. Let's go scale that and optimize towards that. So.
Really cool. Yeah, we were talking earlier before we started this about just like, I don't want to call it desperation, but sometimes it feels like desperation of brands searching for new customers. Like I talk to so many people who say, we really feel like we're just showing ads to the same people over and over again, and we're desperately trying to get our ads in front of people who don't know about us so we can actually, get net new customers. So that's a very interesting use case. Like the metrics, it's hard to see that,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. And then one thing I wanted to ask you about, and this is just, I don't know, like candidly, if you want to get in the weeds on this too, but one thing I've been curious about personally is a lot of Meta's like events are probabilistic now. And then, with server to server tracking, what is this kind of split between probabilistic modeling and kind of seeing these conversions come through and attribution versus the more deterministic, like actual matching side in terms of conversions? How does that work with server to server tracking? Do you guys also use probabilistic models? And then what's your take on this approach?
Yeah, so that's kind of a platform question, and I wouldn't say that I'm an expert in the platform. I know that if you give it enough time, can't you get rid of the modeled conversions? You're talking about modeled conversions, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. If you give it gets a week or so, maybe a little bit more, those modeled conversions do go away, right? They're more to show you from what I understand, they're more to show you what's happening today. They try to take guesses as to how many people may have converted, and I'm pretty sure it's on somewhat lower volume. Again, I'm not an expert in the platform. We're experts at sending the data, but we don't obviously don't run ads like you guys or anything. But I guess how does it relate to server side? I guess there's probably no difference because it's the same pipelines that we're sending. So I wouldn't really expect a big difference. It might be something you could ask a meta rep about. Maybe because the data quality is higher, maybe they do less modeling, but I'm not sure. All I know is when I talk to some clients about modeling, they don't like it and they want to see the data without the modeling. And I'm pretty sure the
Okay.
way to do that is you go into the past a little bit. I don't know. It's an interesting question to know, like, is there a way to isolate the modeled purchases from the actual? And I don't know, but if I was running ads, that's probably a question I'd be looking for an answer to.
Yeah. Well, I thought I would ask.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
awesome. Well, maybe, yeah, last question for you. So we've talked a lot about, how we pass back data, the quality of the data, the fidelity, but why don't we just kind of take a step back too? And do you want to just describe what potentially some of the other features that Elevar provides and what Elevar does? Because I know it's like you have like data layer, you can set up a data layer for brands. There are other pieces like that, but do you want to just kind of speak through all the different features and how Elevar is unique in that sense?
Yeah, sure. So let's step way back and just talk about Elevar at a high level. I told you
Yep.
that the point is to deliver event data into platforms like Meta. That's our end goal. In
Yep.
order to do that, we listen for events that happen on a website, on an e-commerce store typically. So if somebody adds to cart, we've written code so we know when that add to cart happens. And then when it happens, we know what was added to the cart, the inventory, the SKUs, all that kind of stuff, the price, all that stuff that's relevant to an add to cart. We package that information up, push it into the data layer, and then from the data layer, we send it to our server, and we actually also still use a Google Tag Manager container. So there's kind of a fork in the road, and we send data through both in redundancy for many channels. Like for Meta, they want a client-side event and a server-side event. So that's what we do. And then in that process, we also do a lot of enrichment, and that's where there starts to be like increasing value. So we enrich the information that's being sent with stuff that you may not know. Like, for example, if somebody submits their email in a Klaviyo form, like I said before, we will save that internally in our system off-site, away from the issues we have with cookies and ad blockers. And then every event that comes to us will actually populate that email in it before we send it. So all of the different systems on the website, the emails, the SMS, they're all connected and converge in Elevar. And then the information is used to populate the information that gets sent out. And that helps with data quality because most of the time, those events don't have an email address or an address or a
Yep.
phone number. But to those channels like Meta, those things are extremely important because they help the channel Meta, in this case, understand who's actually taking the actions. So that enrichment is a big part of what we do. And then we do a bunch of stuff that cookies, issues with third-party cookies, issues with first-party cookies, issues with click IDs. You're constantly fighting these things. So, for example, if somebody comes from a Meta ad and they're in a Safari browser, their click ID only lasts 1 day in Safari. So if they come from an ad, go to your homepage, browse around, and then leave and come back in a few more days and buy something, you potentially lose the connection from the ad click to the purchase. So it'll go unattributed and you never know. So the longer the sales cycle, the more important this becomes. But it's those problems that there's hundreds of those little problems that we're always working on fixing. So when you add all that up, it all comes down to event match quality in Meta, the cost to advertise, improving ROAS, and in other channels like we help with Klaviyo, we help with Google Analytics 4. It's the same story. The channels perform better, measurably better, automatically by having better data. So I
Yeah.
think that pretty much, I mean, without getting really crazy and talking about all the details, that kind of covers the system and the why. You connect us, your channels perform better. Most people have 3, 4, 5 channels, and that can add up to, Elevar's not, at least by my reasoning, it's not a very expensive tool, but the
Yeah.
performance benefit that you get out of it can be very big. We have clients who, with Klaviyo, made an extra big clients make an extra $300,000 or $400,000 in a month because the data's better. So, that's not everybody I know, but it's very common for even smaller clients who are big in email to make like an extra $4, 5, $10,000 a month. And
Yeah.
it's pretty easy to pay the Elevar bill. So super focused on ROI and making these channels perform better automatically just by connecting.
Yeah. I know for us on the paid side of things, it's given us so much more confidence in scaling up clients across both Meta and Google. And because of that, we'll see immediate impact in the efficiency of campaigns, but it also allows us, like I mentioned, just much more confidence scaling up these campaigns. And we're seeing much more consistency as we scale. For us, it's almost a requirement now for any brands that we're working with to implement a solution like Elevar, because I don't know, it just frankly makes their lives a lot easier. And then just knowing too, I think a big theme of this year, honestly, in the paid media space has been for a lot of agencies and brands to implement server-to-server tracking. I think people are now really realizing the importance of it, and I think companies like Elevar have built a really good, robust solution, and there's like really no question around doing it. And to your point, it's like one of the highest ROI things you can do, especially for the cost. And for us too, it helps us a lot as an agency, because as we scale clients more, we obviously, you know, we get paid more and it works well for us. So it's like we're hugely incentivized, and we see it as one of the biggest, like lowest cost, highest return things that we can do. That's also, and maybe you want to speak to this too, but in terms of getting it integrated and set up, it's very easy. And so that's another thing too. There's just not a whole lot of effort to get it set up. So it's a total no brainer for us at this point.
That's really good to hear. You're kind of going down the line of the value prop that we're always pitching people. So it's nice to hear it fed back, you know.
Yeah.
I totally agree with you. I think it's just kind of a no-brainer. And especially, we do have a lot of partners. We work with a ton of agencies, but sometimes it feels like they don't quite understand that benefits. It's not really a zero-sum game. Like, this benefits everybody. The agency can potentially spend more on
Yeah.
ads because they're more effective, especially across a whole bunch of different channels. That probably means that you can charge more. It also probably means the client's happier. We're happy because you're a client. The channel is also happy because you're spending more. Like, it's a nice dynamic. It's a cool dynamic because we're not really taking from anybody. Everybody's sort of benefiting. As far as the onboarding goes, it's yes. There's a couple options. You can onboard yourself, which I don't tend to recommend if it's complicated. Like if you have consent or if you have many advertising channels, I would always tend to say just pay us for the onboarding. But you can do it yourself. It's set up so you can. It's just you got to do a lot of careful reading. I've been working here for like 4 years, and it takes me still on an average install like 8 hours. And I've been doing, one a month for for a very long time. So if you were to do that same work, my guess is it's double, triple. And the price of install is not very high. So once you look at that, it usually doesn't make very much sense. But the process is fairly straightforward. The most painful part is giving us access to everything we need, because it's kind
Yeah.
of a little bit of open heart surgery. And then the other part, if you onboard yourself, is making sure that all the old tracking is turned off. That's the
Yeah.
killer. Yeah, that's the killer.
Yeah.
People come
We
in.
ran into that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. People click through, they got the Facebook, they get everything set up, and then they're like, okay, we're good. And everything else is still running. And now you have duplicates, and it's a huge pain. It's stressful. So that's probably the hardest thing to get around. And when we onboard you, it's like we don't just go in and click the buttons. It's an overhaul. It's an audit. It's an overhaul of the tracking on the site. So we're in theme.liquid. We're in your order status page. We're in your post-purchase section. We're looking at the code. We're removing stuff that shouldn't be there. It's a lot of work. So yeah, so those are the two options. It's not terrible if you're really on top of it and you pay us to do it. Usually it can be like a few days, best case scenario. If you do it yourself, yeah, it can get a little more dicey. If I was a client and I had one channel, like if I only advertised on Meta, I may consider or I may recommend that you try to onboard yourself. But I would say like as the number of channels increases, especially if you have a consent banner, it's just a way better investment to pay us to do it.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yep.
And your support team is great too.
Thanks.
Super responsive. Yeah.
Yeah. They are awesome. Yeah, they're
Yeah.
awesome. That's the other thing that I think like we're kind of proud about is just we are an app, but we also have a super strong support arm with analysts for GA4 and like experts that, are very hard to find and we don't charge very much for access to them. So that's kind of our model.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that's
Yeah.
all the questions I have for you. I thought this
Okay.
was super helpful. I really appreciate it. So, thanks for hopping on and taking the time.
Yeah, this was really fun. Yeah, and we're gonna have you on our podcast, I think. So we'll probably see you again in not too long.
Awesome.